Well, welcome. This is I'm Jim Peacock with Peak Careers, and today we're having an interview and talking about the value of reading professional books, journals, blogs for career practitioners. How does this really help your own professional development? Um, so, Peak Careers, I started this in 2000 when I was taught the Facilitating Career Development course, which was known as the CDF class. Is now called the FCD course. I also produce a monthly newsletter for career practitioners. Feel free to sign up for that. If you'd like, I do provide individual career counseling, workshops for career practitioners. I've done a bunch of different workshops. Some of my favorites are using card sorts, understanding transitions, happenstance, LinkedIn, and a few others. I have my online seminars, which are a little different than what other people are doing. These are discussion-based with other career practitioners on a variety of different topics. They are typically 5 weeks, 15 recertification hours. But I usually have at least 5 career practitioners in there, and we actually cover these different topics through reading, watching some videos, and then discussing this topic, which really gets people into a sort of a deeper understanding. So that's what Peak Careers is all about. Today I've got Aimee Parker, good friend of mine. We met back when we both worked at Bates College, and we used to go have coffee once in a while, and it was very nice. But Aimee is a professional that is passionate about HR and has worked in the government, private, and nonprofit sectors. As a self-described optimist extraordinaire, she lives by the credo that life is what you make it and serves in order to share this message. Lynn, Carroll is a career coach in the Philadelphia area with a particular focus on women in STEM, people of color, LGBTQ, job seekers, and introverts. Her Career Authentically blog is full of positive encouragement and useful tips, and you can check it out at her website. She does a great job. I love your newsletters that come out. They're very, very practical, and I encourage people to check that out. So let's get into our discussion today, and I'd like to start with Aimee. And so, Aimee, why do you think reading is so important for you and your professional development?
So I had an experience. I was traveling to a conference a couple of years ago with a seasoned HR professional that I really respect. And I said, what do you think really helps sort of lead you to the success that you've had? And she said, I am an avid reader of business and other professional books. And I'm an avid reader, but I can't say that I was spending a lot of time on those types of books. So I immediately started reading various types of books. And I actually carry a notebook with me in my bag. And every time somebody gives me a book recommendation, I write it down. So I have a long list of books that I'm going to read. But I feel like for me, it's just helped me just expand my view of a number of different topics. I read books that, I don't particularly agree with. I even read, back to some of the classics, like How to Win Friends and Influence People. Sometimes I go back and reread books that I thought were really powerful, but maybe didn't remember specifics about. So for me, it's just expanding my view of the world and thinking about other people's thoughts and opinions in a different way that I may not have been introduced to otherwise.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Lynn, what are your thoughts on that?
I enjoy reading, and I feel like every book that I read that can help put me in someone else's shoes helps me look from a different perspective. And a lot of times what I do is I try to read books that are slightly out of the mainstream, or the authors are slightly out of the mainstream. And that way I can see what career development looks like from a whole new place. If I'm only reading books that are written by people like me, then that helps only reinforce what it looks like from where I sit. But I try to read books by all different kinds of people, and that gives me a much broader perspective. It helps me empathize better with people who are coming from a totally different place than I am. And I think that makes me a better coach. And it's also just a lot of fun.
Yeah, I agree. I'm very eclectic with my reading, and I do think it is your point too. If you're reading all the stuff that you already agree with, it's kind of like, yeah, I know it. It's a different perspective, and it's great. But you really do need to sort of nudge yourself and kind of take on those different points of view, because as Aimee said, what we're really trying to do is expand our view,
Right.
And so I really want a broader view. And it's really interesting, that some of these people like Malcolm Gladwell and some of the stuff that he's looking at stuff from a just really very different perspective, and sometimes their insight into what the kind of work that we're doing is really helpful for us I have a lot of those aha moments where I kind of go, wow, that was really a very interesting way of saying that, and giving that insight.
Right. And I think as career coaches, career practitioners have to meet a client where they are. And like, for example, I had a client that I talked with whose faith or spirituality was the most important part of their life. And it was really hard for them if they were at a workplace that didn't let them express that in some way, shape, or form. They weren't trying to force their religion on other people, but it was just part of taking a breath for them. And so we talked a lot about how that aspect of career development is not in many self-help books. Does it make sense? Like, you don't read that very often in a book about finding a job. You don't read stuff about what role your faith plays in that, and what role a person of faith would need to incorporate their faith into the job search. So we talked a lot about how that's something that they need to maybe go elsewhere, outside the self-help section of the bookstore or library. But it's just really important to be able to meet them where they are, I think. And different books of different types and from different authors help me do that.
I think there's a misconception too that some people have of expectations of when they read a book, that all of a sudden it's just going to blow their mind or it's not worth it. And the way that I look at it is, if I get one nugget of information from each book that I read, then it was of value to me. And I do typically have that one aha moment where I think, that's why that happens, or that's why that happened with that particular individual, or, here's something I need to be aware of. So I think that's important too, is just setting expectations when you read that, especially if you're a professional, you may have already encountered a lot of this, but just looking for that one piece of information can be really valuable.
Definitely.
Yeah, I get lots of my blog inspiration from reading books from different, from those different perspectives. And as you say, there's some stuff that's kind of like, yeah, I've seen this before, but I keep reading, and as I'm reading for those. That's a really great point. And I'm highlighting, and if you, as you see on my website, every book I read, I write a little couple paragraphs. It's nothing huge, but I write a little summary of it, but I'm always keeping notes and highlighting stuff in the books and going, oh, that's a great point. Some books they're just filled with, lots of great ideas, but that's a great point.
I also have found that social media for me has allowed me to communicate to the authors when I have those moments. Mm. And it's created really interesting conversations. Like on Twitter, I'll see if they are on Twitter. And if they are, I'll put a quote from the book that I took a screenshot of with my phone, like I take a screenshot of the page in the book, whether I've highlighted, and then I quote just a couple of words from that sentence, and I'll put great insight, and then I'll tag them. And it creates a conversation with the author that wasn't possible before social media. And I really like that. I feel sort of like I made I added to my own personal network, and I let them know that the words that they put out there found a home. And I think it's just really neat.
That's awesome. So let's move on to the next question. Is what kind of recommendations do you have for the career practitioners and the career coaches that who is primarily my audience? Aimee, why don't you start again? I'll go back to Aimee. We'll just jump around a little bit.
So I think it's a good idea to read a diversity. And I don't honestly think it's just about books. And I know you're going to touch on this in a minute. I think there's a lot of value in reading different blogs, a lot of value in reading different types of books. I'm really hot on podcasts right now because I spend a lot of time in the car for my job. And so that's one important thing. I think the other thing is to read, books that do speak to you and speak to the people that you're working with, or may speak to the people that you're working with. So one of the books that I have been reading recently that I really enjoy is Authentic Leadership. I've been reading a lot about leadership because I'm working with an organization in which there's a lot of change in leadership, and so people are really struggling with that. So I think if you're reading things that are really relevant to what you're experiencing now, that can be really helpful and a lot more meaningful to you at that time.
Great. Lynn.
Well, I was joking earlier that when you ask an introvert what they're reading, you're going to have to put up with quite a bit, because I read a lot, and it's one of the ways I recharge my battery. So one of the ones that I recommend for career coaches or career practitioners, career counselors, it's a little on the, when I say it's on the academic side, it's clearly written from the point of view of why the economy is the way it is right now. So it's called Down and Out in the New Economy. I'm not sure if this will come up backwards, but if it does, forgive me.
No, you're good.
And it talks a lot about the reasons that the economy has changed. And it's by Alana Gershon. It says, Down and Out in the New Economy, how people find or don't find work today. And it talks a lot about the gig economy, and it talks about how you can't market yourself. You have to market yourself as a business rather than as an individual person in a way. And you kind of are approaching, you need to approach your job search as if you're a small business of one, and you're trying to find a collaborator that if you collaborate with this other company, the two of you can have success together. So it's a good way to look at it. It's a different kind of way. The other book I want to let people know that I really enjoy is by a person who's a self-described introvert like me. Her name's J. Kelly Hoey, and she also has a blog that I find helpful. And she also just has a lot of stuff on LinkedIn that is helpful, and she is happy to connect with people on LinkedIn in general. So it's called Build Your Dream Network, and she talks a lot about being intentional and mindful in your effort to create a network that is based on generosity, a network that's based on people helping each other. She also talks about how if you take the first step to help someone in your network, it creates that kind of reciprocity system that can become so wonderful. And I have communicated with her. I saw her speak at a conference, and after that, she and I, talked a lot on social media, and she's just so generous. She's wonderfully generous and very kind. So those are two that I enjoy lately.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So besides books, which is really what we started on, what about journals or blogs or magazines and stuff? Is there any advice that you have out there? Lynn, go ahead, you're up.
Sure. I do read a ton of blogs. I have to say I do take blogs with a little bit of grain of salt, because that there wasn't an editor involved. So I would just guide people to not take what a person puts in a blog as as fact more than they would a book. It's one person's perspective or point of view. That being said, I think blogs are excellent ways to challenge your own preconceived notions of what you think things are going to be. So it's really helpful. I don't read a ton of magazines because I think a lot of the magazines, I worry that a lot of magazine articles aren't geared towards the type of clients that I work with, because my work is so focused on sort of outside the mainstream, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. That being said, every once in a while I do find a magazine that has an article that does really resonate. So every once in a while I'll come across that.
Aimee, your thoughts?
Yeah, so I have to echo that sentiment. I don't read a ton of magazines. I'm a pretty avid reader of the New Yorker, just because I like the diversity of the topics that's in there. And often they do have, articles that are really about professional and personal development that I really like, or telling stories about other people's experiences. And I do think, that's one of the things that I really enjoy, is reading about someone's actual journey or actual experience, to sort of get those nuggets of information and think about something in a different perspective. A podcast that I really like is Optimal Living Daily. They actually have a really unique model. They read blogs from around the web, so that if you're somebody that does not have the opportunity to read them, they will read them to you. They select them. And they have a number of different sort of topic areas. So they have one for personal finance, they have one for relationships, they have one for business. And that's interesting because it touches upon blogs that I might not otherwise have read. And they're really short snippets. So that's an interesting way, I think, to take in information. I spend a lot of time on LinkedIn, and that's really where I get exposure to a lot of different articles, because I do have a huge network on LinkedIn. I do have a large diversity, of opinions and voices. And I think it's a really great way to get exposure to those types of articles that I might not otherwise have seen. I think social media in general is just really powerful if you're using it in a way that isn't taking up too much of your time. So you have to be careful, because it's a dark vortex that can pull you in. But I definitely think LinkedIn is a very valuable tool.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I try to check out groups on LinkedIn and who's talking, and I have some key followers. Just for me, the other thing is National Career Development, Career Convergence. I'm a member of NCDA, and that that's my professional association of choice. Their Career Convergence comes out once a month, and there's just different perspectives and different themes, and also their Career Developments magazine comes out I think quarterly, and that one's really good too. And again, they come out on different themes, and so those are my people. So those are I do want to know what they're thinking. But whenever I go into a bookstore, or stumble on a wall of magazines, I like to embrace intentional serendipity and just go and kind of go, that's interesting, and I pull Inc. magazine off the rack, and I just sort of look at the titles of a lot of the articles that are in there. It could be The Economist. I mean, it could be any number of things. I think it's The Economist I grabbed when I was flying recently and came back. And what was really interesting is there were some articles in there that really resonated with me regarding that perspective. As both of you have kind of said, it's so important that we look at the different points of view. I mean, we don't want to get into politics, but too many people all they do is they read their own point of view, and that just reinforces it. And I think if we are really going to do our job as career people and help people make those decisions and move on in their own career development, in whatever job we're doing, we need to know we need to know other perspectives. I get a lot of great blog ideas from these magazines, and just reading different things. Even the little in the airplane, the little magazines in there. There's always I often find good articles that help with that different perspective. So,
to me, sorry, Aimee.
That's okay. Go ahead.
Anything that you decide to pick up and read, if it has something that speaks to you, it's only one opportunity to explore a new idea. So I guess sometimes I would pick up an article and read, and I will actually disagree with what the author writes, perhaps for some reason, but it helps me. It's not that I want to fight with the author, because I don't, but I guess it helps me to know how to describe my position more clearly, because I can articulate what it is about my position that that would be a counter argument to their argument. I do this sometimes with, I have clients who are introverts, and some of the literature out there talks about how you have to walk into an interview and project confidence. And that's challenging for some people, and it can feel inauthentic. You know, there's been research that you can do a power pose for 2 minutes before your interview, and then you walk in and you stand straight and you put your shoulders, square your shoulder, like all this advice about how to appear to feel confident. And sometimes when I'm talking to clients that say to me, I can't find a way to pull that off. I can't pull that off because it's not who I am. Then I talk to them about, do you have a place inside you that knows that you have confidence in this particular subject? And we talk about ways they express that in a quiet way, or maybe they might express that in a way of other than physical imposing presence, rather than walking into the room with confidence. Maybe they say something like, this is the subject that I'm most passionate about.
And so you're saying is by reading these different articles, these different perspectives, it really has helped you sort of in your own practice.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And it's helped me articulate how to counter conventional wisdom in certain areas. Yeah. Exactly.
Aimee, final thoughts?
Yeah, I think I'd like to just address one of the number one questions that I get asked. I read 52 books a year. That's my goal every year. And I am frequently asked, how do you find the time? And one of the books that I just read said, you make time for what's important to you. And reading is really important to me. And the other thing is I don't watch TV. So that's the quick answer. But I do. I think it's really important in my life for my personal and my professional development. And so I do make it a priority.
That's a great point, and thank you for bringing that up, because that is an issue. A lot of people say there's no time. One of the things that I do is I have a to-do list every day that has 3 things on it. That's it. Those are the 3 things I'm going to work on. But one of the things that I do is I have a 1, 2, and a 3, but then I have an A, B, and a C, which tend to be those filler moments. I actually set a timer I work at home. I work for 45 minutes, and then I take a break. That 10 or 15-minute break, I can watch a TED Talk. That 10 or 15-minute break, I can actually pick up a book and get through 10 or 15 pages sometimes. And so it's a matter of, as you said, setting priorities and saying, what's important? How am I going to find this? Mm-hmm. So anyways, I want to put some closure to this. Thank you both very much for joining me on this discussion. I am passionate about professional development in general, but I also love to read. So if anybody's interested, you may sign up for my newsletters, which come out once a month, and then I also send out what I call flyers, just on some other sometimes tips, weekly tips sometimes. But you can sign up and get the top 10 tips of working with an undecided person. Feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn or any of those other social media places where I hang. And I don't know why I don't have Twitter on there, because I am on Twitter, but feel free to connect with me. And thank you both, Lynn and Aimee, for joining me today on this discussion.
You're welcome. Thank you.
It was a lot of fun. Thanks so much for having us.